Hello, this is John Kogan, and I'm the CEO of Proformative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Best Practices in Budgeting and Planning. Advances in technology are creating opportunities to realize the benefits of creating better alignment of budgeting and forecasting efforts with strategic initiatives and operating in a dynamic financial planning environment. What does it mean for a company to move from a static to a dynamic planning and forecasting environment? How are companies leveraging technology and redefining processes to offer the right data at the right time to the right people within their organizations? Today's webinar will focus on best practices being utilized by companies on the forefront of budgeting and planning, and includes a case study of how one company has reaped the benefits of transforming from static to a dynamic forecasting and planning process. Before we get going, we've got a few items to cover. First, of course, a great thanks to our event sponsor, Host Analytics. Obviously, they're steeped in today's content, and they also helped us out by providing us with wonderful speakers, including a subject matter expert, former CPA, and one of their customers to talk about today's topic. So a great thanks to Host Analytics. Next up, a quick word about Proformative. To those of you who are new to Proformative, we are the largest and fastest growing online community for corporate finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. There are more than 500,000 of us that we reach every month. It's a very vibrant online community, and it's really a peer-to-peer area for finding help from folks who have been there and done that. And we literally have tens of thousands of CFOs and tens of thousands of corporate controllers, et cetera, online, and it's an amazing thing, and it's all completely free, no ads, no self-promotion. It's a wonderful thing. If you haven't already, please check it out at www.proformative.com. A couple of notes on today's event. We are offering CPE credit to the CPAs in the audience today. In order to get CPE credit, whoops, sorry, wrong bullet. In order to get CPE credit, we have 3 polling questions that will be asked during the course of the event. 1 early on and then 2 a little later on. If you want the CPE credit, you must answer all 3. But these are statistical questions in nature, and it's always great to see what our peers are thinking or doing. So even if you are not here for CPE credit, we'd love it if you take 15 seconds to answer these CPE questions. The first bullet, a link to today's presentation is already out on proformative.com/resources. So you can download the presentation right now on Proformative for free, of course, and we will send out an email link to the presentation and to a recording of today's webinar. That will come out within 24 hours, and you'll be able to get that, send it around to colleagues and friends, et cetera, if you'd like. Next up, we encourage you to please ask questions. Today's topic is near and dear to the heart of almost everyone I've ever met in finance and accounting, budgeting and forecasting, something we deal with. Certainly month to month, quarter to quarter, it never seems to go away. It's always complex and challenging. And we have 2 bona fide experts in this process helping us out with today's webinar. So take advantage of that. There's a question area in your GoToWebinar control panel if you take a quick peek. Ask questions anytime. And we will do our best to get to those questions during the Q&A period, which will come at the end of today's 2 brief presentations. Finally, when we finish up today and we shut down the webinar, you will be asked to take a short survey. We always want to do better the next time. We appreciate your feedback. So if you would give us, it's just 60 seconds to take that survey at the end. We would greatly appreciate it. It really helps us do better in the future. Also, if you happen to be interested in reaching out to Jeff at Host Analytics or anyone else at Host, we're happy to help you do that. And in that survey, you can simply click to request that connection, and we're happy to make that. We have a few learning objectives for today's event. The bottom line is, just very quickly without reading each of these bullets, we want you to learn about current and emerging technology and techniques in planning, budgeting, and forecasting so that you can bring some ideas back to your company and hopefully improve your budgeting and forecasting processes there. So that's really what we want you to get out of today's event. Go back smarter and hopefully with a couple of ironclad ideas that perhaps you can implement to make this process more productive and less painful at your company. And kicking us off today, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Gelderman. Jeff is a director of the Solution Consultants at Host Analytics. Jeff brings 13 years of experience in the corporate performance management software space to Host Analytics. Serving in a number of different capacities, he's been a subject matter expert, managed partner platforms, and performed account management for FRX Software, Hyperion Solutions, Microsoft, and, of course, Host Analytics. Prior to beginning his career in CPM software, Jeff leveraged his CPA whilst working in public accounting and in finance for a global manufacturing company. So Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. It's our pleasure to have you, and why don't you go ahead and lead us off.
Well, thanks very much, John, and thank you everyone for attending today. Just to elaborate a little bit on what John mentioned in terms of my background, I did start in public accounting, then ended up in a financial analyst / controller role in corporate finance for a global manufacturer based in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live. Now, the world that I operated in at that point was an interesting one. We had some significant tools at our disposal. We had SAP as an ERP system, multiple tools for things like consolidations, reporting, budgeting, analysis, etc. But what I found was that I operated in a world of Excel because I was having challenges leveraging some of the tools that were out there for me. And unfortunately, it's what led me out of the world of finance. I made it, as you see the graphic in front of you, probably only to the hunched over monkey role of evolution there that you see. I share this picture with you because in my role at Host Analytics, it's a unique one. In what I do in the software world over my career, I get the opportunity, and I think it's a unique opportunity, to talk to hundreds of companies in a year, certainly thousands over my career doing this, and get to talk with CFOs, VPs of FP&A, corporate controllers, and the like, and hear about what's going on in their world, and oftentimes end up getting to work with many of them to solve some of those problems. But this graphic you see in front of you is a pretty common theme from all those conversations. Everyone wants to move to the right here, more get out of that bean counter role, get out of the true accountant, let me add the numbers up, scorekeeper kind of role, and evolve into somebody who's actively participating in driving that business forward. So we'll talk a bit today about what I've seen over my career, of things that can help in that regard as it relates to the budgeting, planning, forecasting pieces of that equation. So one of the very, very common themes that exists companies large and small all over the world are spreadsheets. Everybody uses spreadsheets, and there's often a question of why would I change, right? What's the advantage of it? So what? I can go from 6 months to 4 months for my plan, or I can go from 6 weeks to 4 weeks to create that plan, whatever your case might be. And I would suggest to you, as we talk about this and as Monica talks about her personal experiences, you think about a couple of things. There's many out there that might drive you to make some changes, but these kinds of changes are going to help impact a lot of things that we'll talk about next. But a couple key things to think about. A, people and retention. So when I moved into the world of finance, I didn't sign up to be a spreadsheet jockey. It's not what I learned about and had stars in my eyes in undergrad and grad school when I was sitting in accounting classes. It was a very different picture in my head that didn't really end up playing out in reality. People and retention can really suffer because of having to live that world of the spreadsheet jockey that I was. It's what drove me out of the profession, unfortunately. And one of the great stories that I've experienced or heard recently was a customer of ours that I had the opportunity to chat with who had automated their process, and I was speaking to their VP of FP&A earlier in the year, and I said, well, how's it going, right? I hadn't talked to her since she implemented a tool, and she said, you know what, this was the first Thanksgiving I've had that I was actually able to see my family and go out and shop. Right? She didn't talk about budgeting. She didn't talk about technology. She didn't talk about anything related to finance. There was a very personal impact for her because their budget books were due to the board the first week of December. So historically, she was working entirely through the Thanksgiving weekend. And it made that change for her. It certainly made her life a little better and made her work life a whole lot better. So there's an absolute cost there. And then the other thing I would suggest you consider is, are there projects out there that you'd like to do but you haven't been able to? Or maybe projects that someone's asking you to do that you haven't been able to get to? And if I could have in my prior life help somebody understand the cost to repair one of the elements that my business unit was responsible for, I wouldn't have just been a business partner, as you see on the far right of this picture. I would have been a hero, right? And getting out of the minutia is what's going to get me to that point of being able to deliver on some of those things. So for this conversation, what we'll do is focus in on 9 things that I've heard over and over and over with all the companies I've had the opportunity to talk with that have led them to better budgeting and planning, and ultimately, really what that gets back to is better decision making. And we'll build these up from the ground up, not necessarily in order, but some of them are a bit foundational. The very first one, as you can see there, is systemizing the budgeting process. So ultimately, manual just does not cut it, right? It takes way too long, way too much opportunity for error. Personal story along those lines, my sister-in-law recently was going to build some shelves for her closet. And rather than going and buying some shelves or some other means to that end, she actually had some pieces of wood that she manually cut with a handsaw for these boards for the shelf. So the fact that my brother-in-law wasn't helping her was beside the point, but it was like a badge of honor for her once she started that she knew it was going to take her 3 hours to cut these boards, but as she began, it was kind of this thing where she just felt like she had to do it, she had to finish it, she had to see it through. But if she'd used a table saw, that would have taken her 5 minutes, right? There's really no reason to spend 3 hours cutting boards these days for something like that. Either use some automation or go buy some automation, have someone have already cut those boards for you, right? Kind of an out and left field example, but kind of, to me, speaks to this manual approach to things, right? And maybe a bit more relevant example, I saw a study out of the Department of Defense recently where they were looking at the error rate in recording data. So what they did is they looked at using barcoding versus manually recording data through data entry. And in barcoding, the error rate was 1 in every 3 million records. Okay, so pretty, I'd like those odds, right? In a manual environment where people were physically keying or punching these things in, the error rate was 1 in 300. That's a factor of 10,000 in terms of the improvement moving from a manual to an automated world, right? And as I start thinking about pushing my numbers out to Wall Street or making decisions about where I'm investing my money, I'd much rather have that 1 in 3 million odds of messing up than the 1 in 300 odds of messing up. Now, as it relates to systemizing the budgeting process, it's interesting as I talk to various companies of all sizes, shapes, industries, et cetera, specific plans from company to company are different. Company A that does one thing is going to have some things in their plan that are very different from company B that is in the exact same industry and same size. However, regardless of those little nuances, the process of planning really is fairly consistent from company to company to company across industries. There's just little nuances, terminology, and different models that you might use to accomplish different things, is my take on things based on all the conversations and companies I've dealt with. So my point here is that there are systems that have been specifically designed for the business planning process. So if you are going to get out and automate this process, don't reinvent the wheel. Use one of those systems. There's many of them out there that are purely focused on budgeting, planning, reporting, consolidation, et cetera. So leverage the work that's already been done. Don't reinvent that wheel. And ultimately, what we're talking about here when we systemize this is getting out of the minutia. I didn't go and get 2 degrees, sit through the CPA exam to become that Excel gymnast that I became, right? I could have done that with some online help in Microsoft Excel a whole lot quicker, a whole lot cheaper for sure. So when I start to add that automation, many, many things all of a sudden start to domino in terms of the positive effects there, getting out of the minutia being that first one that tips over in terms of those dominoes. Okay, so let's keep moving on here. Let's talk about the second element, which would be the concept of rolling forecasts. So I think Monica's going to talk a little bit about how this has impacted her and Parsons, but I hope I'm not the first one to break this news to you, but I'm going to go ahead and say this now. The day you publish your budget, it's wrong. And I experienced this in a very significant way where I was. We used to spend 6 months creating our annual plan. We would finish that process 2 months into the next fiscal year. So to me, that was kind of like betting on the football game at halftime. We would then spend the next 10 months explaining why we probably shouldn't compare our actuals and look at variances relative to the annual plan because it's outdated and it's wrong. So we were spinning a lot of wheels there. We were wasting a lot of motion, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of brain cells, just going back and basically explaining away that thing we spent 6 months doing, right? And I see this over and over and over where people spend a lot of time investing into the planning process but aren't able to make it truly real-world, real-time kind of discussions. So my suggestion to you is to do whatever you can to keep that as an active dialogue. Don't make it a one-time thing, stake in the ground, because certainly in today's world, things are changing pretty darn regularly. Now, as I talk to folks who have begun doing that or are considering it, it's always interesting to me because sometimes there's a fairly random approach to it, it seems. How far out are we going to look as we start to look forward, be it in the annual plan or in this thing that I'm going to roll every month, every quarter, whatever the case might be? And what I would suggest to you is to have some very serious conversations about that before you head down the path. So, what's truly relevant and meaningful in your world? What can you control that actually matters? So will the price of fuel in February of 2018 truly impact a decision you're going to make today? And some of you are going to say, well, why, yes, absolutely it will. There's hedging contracts and there's this, that, and the other that if I know what it might be then, I'm going to act differently now. Well, if that's the case, then your plan should certainly go at least that far out, if not further, to some degree, right? But if the price of fuel next year in this month isn't going to impact a decision you make today, or the price of those key drivers in your business is probably what I should say, or the values and so forth of those key drivers, then maybe that's a little further outside the window and you're wasting some energy trying to have people thinking that far out. And that's what leads to some disbelief potentially in the planning process, is you're talking about things that really truly aren't relevant to the people and the decisions they're making today. So I would certainly consider that time frame. And then the last couple of things related to rolling forecasts, very key, right? First, you got to automate. When you're rolling the forecast, it's no fun in Excel. It's a very, very challenging, tedious process. Think about all the tabs of all the spreadsheets that people are working on in budget books today. And now think about the process of going into every one of those tabs, deleting a column of budget, inserting a column of actuals, and then going and making sure everything actually ties back to the ledger again. Right? Very, very tedious, fraught with error, and not a lot of fun. So automation is what's going to make that truly possible or practical. And then the other one would be integration back to your ledger, because it's important that you're bringing those actual results in to drive yourself forward so that you can act on or react to true experience. You need to be able to integrate with that data so that that process doesn't become a challenging, tedious exercise as well. So let's keep moving here. The third element that we're building here is what I'll refer to as initiatives planning. And when I talk about initiatives planning, I'm talking about significant events or activities that may be happening downstream. And I feel like to be able to truly take advantage of opportunities in the market as they present themselves to you, you've got to be able to look at initiatives or key big projects separately from your standard operations. And what that allows you to do is to kind of take a look at what is the status quo versus the what could be elements. Maybe you've got a large bid out for new business. You need to be able to kind of toggle that in and out of your plan to understand what are the impacts if we include it, what are the impacts if we don't. And when you're able to consider all those things in various different ways, that can be a pretty significant impact on your ability to make decisions based on those possible outcomes. The analogy I think of often when I think about these things goes back to the TV show Survivor. So if you've never seen Survivor, it's the show where people go to this island and they, over the course of the season, proceed to vote each other off the island. The last person on the island lives, or not lives, but gets to stay on the show. Not quite that serious. And one of the common themes in the show are these challenges that they go through as teams. And they win things, or they get to stay on the island if they win the challenge and so forth. They're competitions. And one of the common ones is a puzzle, or the common themes of those is a puzzle. And it's interesting, if you go look at the puzzle challenges, the people who most often win those are the ones who actually get to try the most combinations. Here's a bunch of blocks. You got to make them into a shape that looks like this. So I need to be able to twist and turn and move around the different pieces to get to that ultimate end product. So if I've got the ability to try more combinations of these pieces than the team next to me, I'm probably going to win. I'm probably going to get it done faster, quicker, better. And that's really what we're after here. You know, the person who, the planning, the organization and the plans that can consider all these possible initiatives, all these possible things, events, activities, and outcomes is going to have the advantage. So I would encourage you to think specifically about those and figure out how you can kind of incorporate those into that decision-making process. So the fourth element is, I'll term it strategy and execution, and let me explain what I mean by that. In my world, I used to manage the process of planning for 3 of our business units. We had many business units. And what I often heard from the folks who operationally were responsible for those business units was the phrase finances budget, finances plan, accounting's plan, et cetera. They really saw it as just a nuisance, and they weren't really getting a whole lot of value out of that process. And I think it was because we were very fiscally focused, very financial numbers, general ledger focused at the end of the day. And what seems to me to be the key in terms of really bringing people together as part of this process is to really change the language so that the drivers of the strategy of your business are those things that are ultimately driving the planning conversations out operationally. So that these folks, when they're talking to their COOs or CEOs about the nature of their business, they use certain terms, right? The metrics of your organization and so forth. Now, when we start talking about the plan, the exact same thing should really be true. And what that allows you to do is start to connect that true strategy with the things that you're doing in your plan. You know, all too often I see people who will just kind of discreetly roll up some expenses and revenue, but it doesn't tie back to those metrics. It doesn't involve those things, and certainly it's not flowing, driven by the strategy that's being pushed down or attempted to be pushed down from the top. So I would say, I would encourage you heavily to take a step back from the planning that you're going through today and think about it. And do the things that are being talked about at a board level and an executive staff level, are they truly translating down into those conversations that you may be having with individual department managers or line managers? And see what you can do to drive those things forward. So the next element is on the visual here termed dashboards and scorecards. An interesting concept. It's always surprising to me how few people are actually truly taking advantage of visualization of data. I used to give people lots of numbers. They were black and white, and they were in grids, right? Your typical Excel spreadsheet look at the world. And many times operational people would get a bit glossy-eyed when they looked at that information. So the ability for you to start visualizing this really allows people to start to see things a little better if they're not debit, credit, finance oriented. I can start to see trends. I can start to see how multiple things maybe compare to each other or might impact one another based on the flow of information or the flow of time throughout my plans or the data or the windows that I'm looking at, let's say. So one interesting point here is the distinguishing between dashboards and scorecards. So I'll often say, do you do scorecards? And people will say, yes, we do. Here's an example. We put some graphs together in Excel. Well, to me, that's a dashboard. It's just a collection of pictures really showing you how you did. When you start thinking about truly scorecarding, now I'm going to start to look at each of those as indicators, and I'm going to weight them, I'm going to score them, so that somebody might truly understand if I have a dashboard that shows me 6 metrics on it, let's say, if I'm weighting and scoring those, I'm going to all of a sudden start to understand, well, which of these is really more important to the business, right? Tying back to that strategy we talked about. So now, rather than picking the easiest one to go think about or work on, I'm really being slapped in the face with, hey, this one over here is weighted really heavily. So if I'm not up to par on this, it's going to affect my overall score, the way people are looking at how I might run my part of the business. So I would encourage you to think about how you can do that. It doesn't have to be a massive million-dollar exercise with lots of consultants involved. I think you can pretty quickly kind of boil down the conversation to what are those key things that are driving the strategy and start to flush them down through the business. But importantly, give some visualization to this so people can understand and kind of consume that in a better way. So moving on, let's talk about operational data next. And this ties back to a few things I've already mentioned, so we'll keep this quick. But think about the last time you were at a meeting and somebody was expounding on the fantastic results you had last month, last quarter, last year. And as you think about those conversations, how many of them did that person reference the general ledger? I'm guessing the answer is none, right, as it should be. Conversations aren't based around the ledger. The ledger keeps score of the operational activities that are going on in the business and those things that we should be thinking about operationally as we're planning and tracking and analyzing the business. So my suggestion to you, and the thing that I see is people who seem to really get this and exceed with it versus those that are stuck and having some challenges in this regard, are that ability to translate the conversation from a GL-driven finance conversation to really truly a more operationally driven, metric-driven conversation as you plan that, as you approach that budgeting and planning process. So seventh, remember we have 9 here, so we're on our last 3, and the 7th in this list is KPIs. So we talked about dashboards and scorecards a little earlier, and this is a little bit different twist on that. So typically KPIs are those dashboards. They're the elements of the dashboard, or maybe they feed up into the scorecard. But when I'm thinking about KPIs in this regard, I think about the old analogy, you can't drive the car looking in the rearview mirror. And if you've ever tried to do it, odds are you might have had some issues. The KPIs to me really play that out in real life. And by that I mean, I see so many people who get caught up in, let's look at last year. Let's just move 5% from last year, or some basis on last year, and really get bogged down in last year. Well, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be involving historical data in your plan. I would suggest you absolutely should and be able to kind of trigger off of it very easily. But the thing I see lacking in so many organizations is a more forward-thinking or forward-looking approach to things. So if I'm in some construction-related industry and a forecast of housing starts over the next 12 or 36 months is probably going to have an impact on my business, that should be part of my planning process. And so often it's kind of extraneous data that's in a graph somewhere, but it doesn't really it's not driven into my plan as one of those drivers that allows me to what-if quickly. So I would suggest to you that, think about those factors that do impact your performance. Think about the conversations that the operational department owners or what have you of the business might be having out there on a daily basis, and identify some of those key metrics. Find the sources that will allow you to pull those in and incorporate them as part of that planning process. So 8th of this list of 9 items, long-range plans and scorecards. The long-range planning process to me is often the forgotten element. It happens somewhere. There's very few people who touch it, and many times it's a very quick and dirty, simple spreadsheet model that maybe is that 5-year plan. Most commonly, I see no link between that long-range plan and then the annual or in-year planning process that goes on today. And shouldn't there really be a cause and effect between those two? If something is happening today or is changed today, odds are it probably has an impact on that long-range plan, and vice versa. If I'm trying to achieve goals 2, 3, 5 years out, I probably need to make a few decisions today that might lead me down that path. So my suggestion to you would be to take a look at what is the level of integration between those two things and figure out how you can truly tie them together to get yourself to a point where there's a cause and effect relationship so that those two things are really leveraging one another and making this process efficient but ultimately realistic and relevant. So our last item in our cylinder or tower or whatever you'd like to think of this as is, scenario modeling. So scenario modeling, and what do we mean by that? Well, all too often it seems that there just aren't any options out there. I used to run to the finish line and we'd run into the meeting and say, here it is, here's the updated plan, or here's the forecast, or whatever the case might be. Unfortunately, I was never able to get to that point where I would say, okay, here's what we've come up with. Here's the baseline. Here's the blue sky. Here's the gray sky view of the world, right? And ultimately, I think that's where everybody should be. It's hard to make decisions without options. In a manual world, you get into the conversation of, well, which version's the current version? And did you update the same version I updated? And all those kinds of questions. It's hard to manage multiple scenarios without some automation. So adding automation to the process is going to be key to get to that point, I believe. But ultimately, figuring out a way to get to that ability to have those what-if options really, really, truly, I think, is a critical factor in giving you an opportunity to make some decisions based on facts versus guesses and hopes. it's what allows you to quickly flip the levers and turn the dials from scenario to scenario and actually start to analyze and do those what-ifs that take you from the left side of that first graphic I put up over to the upright person on the right-hand side of that evolution. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and as a foundation set there, turn things over to Monica, who's now going to share some of her very real experiences along these lines.
And actually, before we jump over to Monica, we're going to ask our first polling question. So let's go ahead and get that going real quick, and then we will introduce Monica and keep on trucking. Thanks for that information, Jeff. I really feel that last point you made there. So many times I've walked in with a financial plan for some period of time and bring it up to the board or to the CEO, and they would immediately say, okay, well, what are our upside and downside scenarios? And you'd be like, oh, God, back to the drawing board. All right, we're going to leave this question up for another 15 seconds. Very simple. Once again, if you're here for CPE credit, you must answer this. If you're not, we'd still love you to answer this so that we can all see kind of where the folks on this call stand. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down this first polling question. And now we're going to get into this next part of our webinar this morning, and we're going to hear from Monica Ross, who's the Director of Strategic Projects at Parsons. Monica joined Parsons in 2006 and is part of the company's senior management team. In her role as Director of Strategic Projects, she heads up change initiatives that keep Parsons on the forefront of the industry. Monica also facilitates the business planning cycle, including strategy, goal setting, and financial planning. Monica has a BS in construction engineering from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and an MBA in finance from the University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management. Monica, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed hearing Jeff Gelderman's presentation because as it's formally a planning season in my company, it just gives me new inspiration to stay the course with changes that we've implemented in recent years and to really evolve from that hunched over monkey into the upright man. So I just want to take this time to share with you our change journey, how we went from a background of spreadsheets and the consolidation and all that messiness to a decision of change, and then how we're implemented it and where we plan to go from here. First off, I'm just going to share briefly a little bit about my company, just so you have a little context. I'll highlight the challenges we felt in our planning process, what we did to change, and where we're at in building our best practices. I don't think we're quite as far up that building block tower as Jeff is inspiring us to be, but it's definitely where we want to head. My company, Parsons Electric, is a specialist in the electrical construction and technologies industry. We're a large company. We work across the United States and North America, actually. We really focus on specialized project management and our specialty engineering and cost consulting services. We feel like those are differentiating edges from our competition. Our current business year is about $180 million, and we have a number of branch offices and operating groups, so we have a lot of contributors into our planning process, which is great, but it also means that we have to be very communicative with each other, and that was one of the challenges that I'll begin talking about here. Over the last couple of years, we really focused in on what was bothering us with our planning process and how were we going to get past all this spreadsheet gridlock. And we narrowed it down to these challenges, which I'll get into talking about in the subsequent slides. With respect to process, we wanted to be much more of building from what each division manager wanted rather than having it be finances plan, I never signed up for that kind of information. So how can we leverage reaching into our business, getting everyone's ideas, and manage all that information throughput so that we could get to a great plan. We just didn't have a tool in place to handle that. We were using Excel, and it was a monster of a budget spreadsheet. It would break, it took too long to update everything. When anybody would ask about a potential scenario, it would send us over the edge, because then you have to think about, well, how many places does that impact? That planning spreadsheet, it just was not functional for any sort of what-if planning or changes. It also, at the end of it, wasn't linked to our general ledger system, which was a problem for reporting purposes. As I was just saying, we really couldn't deal with the what-ifs. We couldn't look back, we couldn't extend it forward very well, and it was just far too fragile to distribute it. You know, if we couldn't share it because people would start changing formulas and everything would break. So as a result, it wasn't a great communications tool. Nobody really felt like they knew that the information they provided in was the information that was reflected ultimately in the budget. And that's a serious problem when it comes to getting buy-in and accountability for ongoing budgets and forecasts. We had a really bad timeline. Our worst year for doing it was as we completed our 2011 budget. We took over 5 months to get to an end product, and as Jeff had mentioned in his presentation, that's an ugly place to be once you're into the fiscal year and you're trying to update with actuals and explain why this and that didn't work. It's no place we wanted to be. And at the end of that 2011 planning cycle, my CFO and I were debriefing, and we just both said, we're not going to do this again. What tools are we going to put in place to make this better? Because we are not going to live like this anymore. We went through a process then to understand what did we need to do to make it better. I mean, we knew what our problems were with it, but we wanted to also reach out across the management team and get a better sense of what they wanted to see, so that if we implemented change, it would be comprehensive. So this is a busy slide, and I won't read all the points, but you get to the understanding that we were able to document what we wanted, what the managers wanted, and then use that as input into what could we do to change. A couple of things that I haven't highlighted in my talking points so far is that our reporting out of our general ledger system wasn't that great. It's a great tool for our industry. It helps us with specific progress billings that we have to do on projects. Great documentation, but just the management reporting, it was not helpful. So that was another thing that we wanted to incorporate into a solution that we went to beyond just the planning and forecasting process. And as we reflected on what would we want to do to change, we did a lot of reading and research, and this quote that I had come across from IBM was pretty powerful to us, that if we want to support our strategic initiatives, we needed to implement a better technology to help us get there. And we use that as really a catalyst, as explaining to our management team, here's why this is an important investment among other top priority investments that our company wants to do. If we want to change, this is what leading companies are talking about doing. Why don't we look at doing that here? Through all that research, we of course came to the decision that it was time for a better tool, but we also understand that cost and schedule is important. We didn't have an unlimited amount of resources to do it, both people-wise and cost-wise. As we went into this implementation idea, our business was very affected by the construction downturn. So it was a big deal to spend money to change our planning processes, but I can tell you we're very happy that we did. So we went forth then look into the marketplace to look at what sort of software products would help us to change because we really didn't know. We had been using Excel and, oh, what else would there be out there? Because our surveys came back from our management team focusing on reporting, as I mentioned, budgeting, forecasting, we really made those our main focal points as we went to market looking at potential solutions. We knew we didn't want to replace our general ledger system. As I mentioned, it functions very well for us from an information transaction standpoint. It just wasn't providing us with the forward-thinking capabilities that we needed. So we looked at a variety of products across different platforms. They might be in-house solutions, they might be cloud-based solutions. Spent a long time with different consultants looking at different options. Narrowed it down to 3 that we went through an RFP process with, and we ultimately decided to go with Host Analytics. We felt that it suited us well from a cost standpoint. Implementation, being a cloud-based system, was something that we were ready to go to. There are a variety of products out there, and so as much as I'm very, very happy with Host Analytics, we are staying with them, but I want you to know that there's a variety of products out there in the marketplace, and it's becoming a much more robust space for different tools that can suit your company's needs. The purpose of this slide is just to give you a little highlight of what it took us to go through and change. We spent a couple months looking at different vendors out there that could help us, and then we were pretty quickly able to get into implementation and start using various components of the software, which has helped us. We focused first on the budget module because by the time we had gone through the business case modeling, the vendor selection, we were of course then again up to fall of 2011, and the budget was looming right in front of us. So that was why we prioritized that one first as the different solutions to go with. And I don't think you have to ever find one perfect time in your calendar year to do it. It's always going to be change takes time, and if you maybe did it during a less busy time, you might go a little slower. We were motivated to go pretty fast because we were up against our budget season. We have 20 users on our system right now. We used it for our division managers. They mainly use it for reporting, but this coming budget season we are going to be using it for engaging all of them and entering their budgets, which scares me a little bit because there's a different spectrum of technology users, but all the same I think it'll really get us to a place where everyone has a greater understanding of the what-ifs and how do we enter scenarios together and come to a good result together. What was really thrilling about last year's budget season is, I've mentioned our pain point for the 2011 season, so that it took us over 5 months to get it done, and we were into the current fiscal year. It was awful. We did it in half the time for 2012, which was great, and I fully expect that we're going to compact that schedule for 2013. So that just gives us a lot more time for focusing on our business instead of crunching numbers. People can still refer back into the software to go back and see, here is my budget assumptions, here's how it's been playing out throughout the year, and it's really easy to carry it forward for future years, whether you consider that a quarterly forecast or the subsequent year's annual budget. You just change a few things and your information is carrying forward, which is a humongous time saver. Reporting has also been really great for us because when a manager wants to see, hey, how are the reporting or the business results going for our operations in northern Minnesota, that might not be a main report that we focus at the management team level on, but when they want to drill down to the specific business units, it's right there on demand, which is fantastic. They're not going back and asking for reports to be pulled. they can pull it themselves. It works great. Also helps for the transaction detail too, that they're not trying to go back into our general ledger system and view other things. Sorry, oh, there we go. I'm going to move back. I double-clicked, excuse me. Let's see, so we've gained a lot of things. We really streamlined our budget build. I've highlighted that, but I think it's also really increased everyone's buy-in into the process because it's not such a black box. They can get into it, touch it, see it, feel it, see how it carries into reporting. It's mattered to us. I feel that there's a wide variety of software tools out there that you'll find much more powerful than Excel. Excel is great for really quick and dirty things, but when it comes to linking information together, we've got, as I mentioned, 15 different operating groups, and seeing how the impact of one affects another. It really has helped to use a more powerful tool that goes back to a database, keeps all your information, and the way that we can consistently, accurately present information has really made us much more credible as a finance organization to our business partners. The business has appreciated it because they can understand what's driving the different analytics that we go through with them. They can engage better in the process. So it's just been a much better communication tool to have a system everyone can join into. Timeline, I've also touched on, has been much more improved. We also have experimented in 2012 with rolling forecasts. I'll admit that we didn't get quite as far as we wanted to just because our industry started to pick up. We got busier overall and had a little less time to focus on the planning cycle, but I feel like all the foundational work is there for the rolling forecasts, and I'm excited for us to continue to use them and have it become much more of a way we manage our business rather than just having these very discrete fiscal year budgets and not looking at a future that's out beyond December of 2013. This last slide is really just a recap of how we are considering our evolution. Jeff presented it from his point of view as an industry expert and sort of a rising tower. Mine's also sort of a stack diagram, but we already went through that process of finding a better tool that suited us beyond Excel. We're happy with it. We've been experimenting with the rolling forecasts. And within that is different scenarios, such as, what if we expanded in a certain geography and how would that add incrementally to our business, that kind of stuff. And the long-range planning, just to see our numbers be able to carry out multiple years and see some reporting on that already is tremendous because it helps us have a better sense of where we're going as we're doing different visioning exercises. So while we're still mostly hovering down in the lower part of this pyramid, I see that we've got the foundation in place to move ourselves ahead, and I feel very pleased about the changes we've made. I'd encourage you all as you go through your budget season to think about ways that you can streamline things. It's made a big difference for my organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. That was excellent. It's always great to hear how people do these things firsthand. And it sounds like you guys were quite successful, so that's great. At this point, we're going to go ahead and do our final two polling questions. We'll just do them back-to-back here. We didn't want to interrupt Monica's presentation for these, so we'll just run through these pretty quickly. Once again, if you're here for CPE credit, you need to take both of these, but even if you're not, please take 10 or 15 seconds to run through these, and we will get to a couple of questions. We've got about 10 minutes left here, and this will take us a few minutes to do the poll, so we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. I'm going to go ahead and leave this poll open for another 10 seconds here. Folks can just go ahead and get your votes in. Then we will get moving on to the final polling question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this one out and open the third poll. And that's coming up right now. Here we go. I will take this moment to remind folks that if you have any questions for either of today's speakers, after you answer this poll, would be a great time to ask them via the question area of your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll also take a moment right now to further remind that there will be a survey after today's event. So as soon as we shut down the event, you'll be faced with a survey. It's a 60-second or less exercise. We greatly appreciate your feedback. And also, if you would like to be connected to today's speakers or directly with Host Analytics, if you have more questions about their platform, we make it very easy for you to make that request. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll down. And now what we're going to do very quickly, as I promised earlier, is we'll turn this around and actually share the polling questions. So we can take a look at how folks voted on this. And this is interesting. Jeff, we've got about a 70-40 split around folks using Excel for consolidation of reporting and at month's end. That's something where we typically see a higher number than that using Excel. And a lot of folks tend to use the same tool for budgeting that they use for consolidation and reporting. So that's a pretty healthy number. Actually, not using Excel. Usually I see more of an Excel tilt on that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
Quickly, we're going to go ahead and hop into the other two and show those results. Second polling question coming up. The collaboration between finance and operations in budgeting and planning is acceptable but needs improvement is the largest. Where it needs to be, 22%, that's also relatively high. But there's still an awful lot of folks out there who could use some help in this. Monica, I would ask you, where was your company sort of pre-upgraded budgeting and forecasting tools versus post on this scale?
I'd say that we were in the limited because we certainly did reach into the business to get input on revenue, costs, different operating expense assumptions. So it wasn't that there was no communication, it was just pretty disjointed and nowhere that it needed to be. Right now I'd say that we're moving towards where it needs to be, but I feel like that's an effort that you can always do better at. The more communication, engagement, interaction across the business with the finance organization makes us all move together better.
Right.
And the planning effort really should be a reflection of what the business sees, not a made-up effort from finance.
Right. Great. Okay, and then the final question was actually related to that last one. Let's let that get up on screen. There we go. The high priority areas for improvement. What are the areas that most need change? People, process, technology. Now this is interesting. Jeff, you're talking to hundreds of companies a year. Do you find that, I mean, here process and technology virtually tied. Are those the big areas people are focusing on? Is that where they get the biggest bang for their buck?
Yeah, I think so. The numbers are pretty consistent, again, with what I would probably have expected. Typically, there's always some people potential changes, right? The whole want to get the right people on the bus and the right seats in the bus type of thought process, but that's not something that typically is overwhelming folks unless they've walked into a really catastrophic situation recently with some new employment. So then you're narrowed down to the other two legs of the three-legged stand, right? The process and technology. So, depending on who you're talking to, how long, the maturity, the complexity, all those things, that the shift between process and technology, I think, will go up or down. So seeing those two as close as they are, not surprising.
Okay, great. So that's it for the polls. Let's go ahead and hop in now to a couple of the questions as we have time. I have a number of questions here around cost, and it's always difficult because cost for what? Obviously, the companies are different sizes and have different requirements, et cetera. But there is, I think, a real hunger for understanding the difference in cost from sort of quote-unquote traditional, maybe more monolithic budgeting and forecasting platforms versus cloud-based platforms, which all the literature states, and people seem to say is a lot less expensive, easier to get into, et cetera. Monica, without necessarily naming what this thing costs you and your company, can you talk a little bit about the cost and maybe the ROI on implementing the new solution?
You know, it was interesting. As we focused in on different softwares, the two that we were toggling between the most at the end, one was an on-premise system, one was a cloud-based system, and the direct cost for each of them was that they work pretty hard to, at least the on-premise ones do, to make themselves look as cost competitive as the cloud-based solutions. And so then it takes a lot of effort as you, the shopper, to think about what are the indirect costs to my organization as I look at an on-premise solution. What costs am I going to have for hardware, for upgrading software, all of the new enhancements that the companies are continually doing to their modules? How distracting is that going to be for me as a finance leader, for my IT organization to implement those changes, communicate about them? And the more we thought about those indirect costs, we realized that we thought the price tag was closer to double than it was presented for the direct costs. And so then it made it quite clear to us that a cloud-based solution was more cost-effective, because for the most part the direct cost was the cost. We certainly had some effort hours that we put into the implementation of it, but you know, as an ongoing thing, I don't spend time on upgrades. My IT manager does not support me with upgrades to the system. It's handled all by the software company, and I think that's a better place to be.
Great. Another quick question here, and this is probably going to be the last question. And again, this is directed at Monica, but another just concern I hear all the time, which is you're integrating a cloud-based solution with a server-based ERP solution, which is not at all uncommon these days. Was that, well, how did that go?
You know what? It has been fine. We've had no security issues with a cloud-based system, and we feel very fortunate about that. But I feel that you know, any credible cloud-based software company is going to go to great lengths to assure you about the security of your data. As for the integration, what we do is there's a rather technical process that is where, and the software companies work with you on it to basically dial back into your server systems, extract the information you want out of your general ledger system, and upload it to the cloud-based software. So you can choose to manually handle it, or you can choose to automate it, and the automation is not terribly expensive. So it's not really a problem to have one as a physical-based system and one as a cloud-based system.
Great. Jeff, just very quickly, given our time remaining, would you care to comment on that last question?
I think she nailed it, really. Ultimately, you're just moving data from one system to another. The fact that the servers sit in a different building for us than they are in your building, it really isn't of much consequence typically. So, you know, the integration between a cloud system and an on-premise system, I don't view that conversation really any materially differently than the integration of two systems inside your own four walls, or you integrating with another piece of software somewhere else in your own internal corporate data center that might sit in a different location. And then, as was mentioned, from a security and availability and all those types of perspectives, a SaaS company such that Host Analytics is, or any others out there, it really is the foundation for them to be successful as a business, because the minute our customers can't count on that, I think we end up going out of business, right? So you should expect the utmost there.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks to Monica and Jeff for your time and great insights today. It was great to have the first half as sort of a primer on some best practices and the second half being real-world experience. It was great having both of you on board, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Great. A couple quick notes here, and then we'll get to closing this down, and you'll be presented with that quick survey, which is the first note on this page. Secondly, please feel free to continue the conversation at Proformative. Actually, there are a lot of conversations going on Proformative about systems for budgeting and forecasting, and it's all peer-to-peer based conversations, which is great. If you have any questions about CPE credit, please contact Chris Brower. You can see her email at the bottom. Finally, thanks again to Host Analytics. It's wonderful to be able to provide all of this education and knowledge at no cost to our users, and that is via the generous support of sponsors like Host Analytics. And once again, if you'd like to be connected with today's speakers or have us connect you with Host Analytics for more questions, you can do that with a click of the mouse in the survey, which will be coming up in just a moment. So we thank everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you again at another Proformative event or online at Proformative.com. Take care. Have a great week.